Okay, so hopefully everyone online can hear me now, and hopefully you all can hear me too. I'll just restart that introduction. So thank you to everyone who's here in Naarm, which is the Indigenous name of where we are located physically, and thank you to all of you who have joined online. I'd like to first acknowledge and pay respects to the past, present, and future custodians, traditional custodians and elders of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual, and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This land, like Palestine, was never ceded, and the struggle for Indigenous rights unites us all. We at Anti-Zionism Australia are guided by truth-telling about history and by anti-racist principles. Today, we're really honored and super thrilled to have to host Professor Ilan Pappé, an outstanding historian, writer, and someone who was born and raised in Israel and is now one of its best-known critics. Pappé has published seminal works about the Zionist colony, including The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, 10 Myths about Israel, and most recently, Israel on the Brink, 8 Steps for a Better Future, where Pappé talks about restorative justice and decolonization, inspiring as always. He is currently director of the European Centre of Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter, but has also taught in Palestine at Haifa University, where he was born. I was also born there. But he did leave Israel in 2008 and now advocates for BDS, including an academic boycott of Israeli scholars. Today, he will tell us about Jewish anti-Zionism and we'll hear from him for about half an hour, 40 minutes or so, before taking some questions. And priority will be given to you here in person, but anyone on Zoom is very welcome to write your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to field those. So without further ado, thank you so much, Ilan. We welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you online, myself and those in the hall and in the net. What I would like to do is to contextualize an initiative which I'm part of, and I'm sure even if you are not formally part of it, you are definitely ideologically part of it. And that's an initiative we started, a few of us, a year ago, convening in the first Anti-Zionist Jewish Conference that took part in Vienna, and now there are preparations for a second Congress in Dublin in the end of June. You can imagine that the first attempt was actually to have the first Jewish Anti-Zionist Conference in Basel for obvious historical reasons. We at first we even thought of having the same number of delegates as were there in 1897, but it was impossible to find a place in Basel that was willing to host an anti-Zionist Jewish Congress. Vienna seemed to be adequate as well, culturally, historically, for challenging Zionism from a Jewish perspective. Dublin was an obvious choice because of the very receptive, very warm welcome that anyone showing solidarity with the Palestinians accepts in a place like Dublin and in Ireland in general. This effort for me is part of what I called in my last book, Israel on the Brink, is part of long-term processes, unfortunately in a way, that I think together, not by themselves, can create a transformation in the reality on the ground in Palestine. And I distinguish in the book between two processes. One, you have, as an activist, an influence on them, and those that have the potential to change the reality on the ground, but on which you have very little influence, either as an individual or as a member of an activist group. And I thought the distinction was important because you know better than where to invest your efforts on the one hand, and then remember to be aware of things that can happen that you have no control over, but nonetheless you have to be alert for them. I'll give you just one example from a different case study for processes that have not been influenced by activism and yet had an influence, transformative influence, on the reality. And this is the connection between the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall on the one hand, and the end of apartheid in South Africa. The ANC, or anyone who was active on behalf of the anti-apartheid movement, had no impact on the end of the Cold War. But the end of the Cold War allowed the United States to join the sanction regime against South Africa, which was a very important factor in bringing down the political apartheid in South Africa. I do not know exactly what would be the equivalent in the case of Israel and Palestine, but that's just one example. Among the processes that we can contribute to, and from my perspective would have huge impact on the ability to change the reality in Palestine, as I say, in the long term, because I don't see any dynamics, unfortunately, that can change the reality in the next year or two or even 3 years. So I'm talking optimistically in many ways, but in the long-term perspective. Among them are, or maybe first and foremost, a change in the way that the Palestinian national movement itself operates. Right now, it's fragmented, disunited, does not represent a joint vision for the future. And for it to be in the driving seat and move us all in the right orientation, it needs to restructure its national organizations or institutions. I'm hopeful because I think this is a mission the younger Palestinian society can take upon itself. I think that there are new energies there, that the younger generation is far more consensual, far more united, whether inside the country or outside the country. It doesn't yet impact politics from above of the Palestinian liberation movement, but I hope and believe that this is something that would unfold in the future. A second process which is very important is the continued isolation of Israel in the international scene. It's already quite an impressive process. Please excuse me, I'll just close the door behind me.
Oh. Can you all hear okay?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, sorry. The second process, as I said, is the continued international isolation of Israel. So far, it's been quite impressive in terms of the action by the civil society. The process that has to unfold, that has to progress, is the movement from action by civil society to action by governments. Or if you want, the movement from boycott and divestment to sanctions. This has not happened yet. I mean, there's early indication that some countries in south of Europe, definitely some countries in the global south, are willing to go in that direction, but all in all, this is still far away in terms of becoming an effective factor in influencing the reality on the ground. The third process is the one that we are interested in, I think, for me at least, and that is the continued dissociation of Jewish communities around the world from Zionism. This is something that, as you're yourself an indication for that, but is probably even more, in a way, crucial in the case of the American Jewish community, especially the younger American Jewish community, where not only there is this inclination to continue and identify Judaism with Zionism, or identify Jewish life, even secular cultural Jewish life, with Israel. Many believe that manifesting their Jewishness includes also deep involvement in the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. This is a very important process. As I say, by itself, and this is true about all the other processes I was talking about, and I haven't mentioned all of them, by itself is not a transformative process. But when it fuses together with other processes, it becomes very, very important and crucial. What is interesting about this process in the United States, for instance, that it led to some two kinds of attempts to redefine Judaism out of Zionism. There was the attempt by the activists themselves, like organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace, JVP, and other organizations, focusing mainly, I think, in a very harsh criticism, and justified, I should say, harsh and justified criticism on Zionism, and therefore directly connecting this process with activism for Palestine, the main thing. But a different reaction was the more scholastic one, I would say more intellectual one, like the works of Daniel Boyarin or Saul Magid, and so on. The attempt to either say that Judaism can still be also defined as nationalism, not only religion, but doesn't necessarily need a homeland, in the case of Daniel Boyarin. Or you can define it as an ethnocultural identity and so forth. These are not matured discussions yet. I mean, they have to mature. They're in the process. But what is important, and I think this is something that people don't pay enough attention to, is that, and I think we will discuss this in Dublin in particular, that there is a connection between these deliberations and attempts to define Jewish life without its association with Zionism, and not only without defending the state of Israel, but through playing a very critical role in the struggle for justice in Palestine. That apart from this, it projects and influences possible discussions that are not taking place yet, but it will take place, on what would be the definition of the collective Jewish life in a liberated Palestine, in a decolonized Palestine. Now, this should be prefaced by saying that if you think revolutionarily, in a revolutionary way, about the situation of Palestine is very different from the one that exists today, then obviously the first thing that comes to mind is that this is a question that has to be addressed to the Palestinians first of all. And and they were never asked, how do they see the millions of Jews who probably will still be in a decolonized Palestine? Because if you look at the so-called peace process from its very beginning, everybody defined for the Palestinians who they were. what they should be. Nobody asked the question, what should be the Jewish collective if it's not a Zionist collective? Because if it continues to be a Zionist collective, namely, if the collectivity of Jews in Palestine is defined by Zionism, that means that we continue the apartheid system. We continue the colonization, the ethnic cleansing, and so on. What is the alternative? And what I claim is that the discussion of what is the alternative to defining Jewish life outside of Palestine in an anti-Zionist way reflects the possible discussion about defining Jewish life in Palestine after decolonization. Understandably, Palestinians don't feel the urgency to deal with it now. Not surprising. Definitely not Palestinians on the ground in Gaza or the West Bank. Not surprisingly, maybe, the Palestinians inside Israel, who should not be forgotten, and they, about 2 million of them today, do deal with it more than any other Palestinian group. Understandably, they know they are the only Palestinian group inside Palestine, historical Palestine, that know the Jews not only as soldiers and settlers. They have far more complex relationship with the Jews, despite the apartheid system of Israel. And therefore, they go further in both discussing this, while other Palestinian groups do not discuss it, as I said, for understandable reasons. And secondly, when they discuss it, there is kind of a spectrum of ideas about it. Some go as far as saying, oh, we are willing even to think about living in a binational state. So Judaism is still defined as nationalism, but not Zionism. I think this is a position most Palestinians who are not 48 Arabs, or not part of the Palestinian community in Israel, do not accept. To the positions that reflect more, I think, possible positions of Palestinians in the future, that define Judaism or the Jewish ethnic existence of whoever would remain or decide to remain in a de-Zionized Palestine, defining it in a similar way that other ethno-cultural and ethno-religious groups are defined, not only in Palestine, but in the whole Eastern Mediterranean. People like the Yazidis, the Alawis, the Druze, the Maronites. It's not only a religious definition, it's an ethno-cultural definition. By the way, a definition in ethno-religious and ethno-culture, which was the way the Jews were defined before the arrival of Zionism in the Arab world and in Palestine itself. This is part of the mosaic of identities, group identities, we had in the Eastern Mediterranean before the arrival of Zionism and imperialism. One should not romanticize the relationship, but it was a genuine coexistence. The exception was the friction. The rule was a genuine coexistence. And it's an inspiring model for the future. And in it, you can see a future for Jewish collective, cultural, ethnic life within a non-Zionist, decolonized Palestine. As I say, this is a part of a discussion, of course, between the Palestinians and those Jews who would be part of the future. I can understand why so many Palestinians right now see it as a bit too premature for discussing it. As such, but this is the constant kind of dilemma we have, all of us. On the one hand, you want to deal with the urgent matters, which relate to existential questions of the Palestinians, but you also want to strategize. You don't want to stop thinking about a long-term activism, policies, and planning. And that's where I think the whole question of anti-Zionist Judaism should fall into. Namely, and I'll explain, and with this because I would like to hear your comments and questions, I will finish my contribution. I think that the organizing an as we did in Vienna, and now we're doing in Dublin. It's not global, unfortunately. I think it focuses on Europe and the United States so far, but hopefully this will become more global. That this kind of networking under the title an Anti-Zionist Jewish Congress, or whatever title in the future this would have, is dealing not only with strategizing, it deals with the urgent need to defend the Palestinians. I mean, the whole idea is to ask openly and candidly, is there a place for specific contribution of anti-Zionist Jewish communities, first and foremost for defending the Palestinians in Palestine? That's the first question. Because, some people would say, and rightly so, I don't think it's an open and shut question. Why do you need a specific Jewish organization for that? Join the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. Doesn't have to be Jewish. Everybody has to be in it. Obviously, the fact that there are such formations and we are doing this conference means that many of us, and that includes many Palestinian friends of us, believe that there is benefit for having a clear Jewish voice on Zionism. It's almost obvious why there needs to be a clear Jewish voice on Zionism, also with respect to Palestine, but I think it's legitimate to ask, is it necessary to be separate? And I don't think we should be afraid of being inconclusive about it, even while we are organizing. I can say for sure, but that's not necessarily a Jewish thing, that descending Israeli Jewish voices are very important in the outside struggle. Unfortunately, they count very little inside Israel. We have zero influence on Israeli. We, the anti-Zionist Jews who are active in Israel, have zero influence on Israeli policy. Really zero. There's no other way of putting it. But when we appear abroad, our voice counts and is important. And again, it doesn't matter whether we like it or we don't like it. I always encounter some frustration from Palestinians who rightly would say, Palestinian historians said what you said for so many years, but nobody listened to them. Now that an Israeli historian says the same, suddenly it becomes valid. Yeah, that's part of the process. It's not necessarily a nice one, but that's the one that works, unfortunately. So I think that this is something that we should be aware of. Definitely, and with this I would end. It's not surprising. It won't surprise you probably to know that the most important impulse for creating a more international network of anti-Zionist Jewish activity for Palestine in the form of this Congress, first in Vienna and now in Dublin, came from the German-speaking world. I don't think it's surprising because it is there, especially in Germany, but it's true about Austria as well, but especially in Germany, the idea that Israel is a Jewish state means that Israel represents all the Jews in the world from a German perspective. And because it represents all the Jews in the world, it represents the Jewish experience and history, and it represents the Jewish victimhood or victims of the Holocaust. And therefore, if Germany wants to atone, wants to absolve itself, wants to repent, all it has to do is support Israel, almost unconditionally, almost regardless of what Israel is doing. And this is so absurd and so disturbing that I'm not surprised that the main initiative came from German-speaking ex-Israelis and Jews who wanted a dialogue, first of all, with the German government and Austrian government and so on, to say that they have nothing against a German reckoning of the past, but they think it's the most distorted way of doing it is by showing this kind of support for Israel, and not only for this particular, I mean, it's particularly absurd for this kind of Israel we have today, of course, but it was from the beginning, from the moment West Germany was created in 1945. It was the wrong path for engaging with the Nazi crimes against the Jews and the Nazi crimes and their allies against anyone else in the continent. But as we know, this is a powerful association in the minds of policymakers in Germany that led Germany to give a lot of money to the state of Israel, money to build an army, to build nuclear capacity. The United Germany's position in the EU is so prominent that when it continues with this unconditional support, it affects the policy of the EU as a whole, which is an important actor. The EU is Israel's main trade partner. It is worthwhile, definitely in the context of German-speaking societies, to raise these questions. And again, as in the case of the historians that I mentioned before, there's a lot of advantage for leading the conversation through Jewish voices on this particularly sensitive issue. And not that Jews cannot be, and I'm sure some of you have individually experienced it, cannot be alleged to be self-hating Jew, and so on, but nonetheless, I think it's less effective towards Jewish activism and Jewish activists. So the question why we are doing it is an open and shut question. The question whether it is effective, whether we're doing it in the right way, or whether we can rethink what we are doing, how should we engage with it, and so on, are definitely open questions that we continue to discuss them while we are still active in what we are doing. So maybe I'll stop here, and I would be very interested to take your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilan. That was perfect and touched on a lot of points that I think as an organization we've been discussing, and here in Australia we've been discussing, especially to do with the need for Jewish voices that are anti-Zionist to come forward, and also the discomfort that some people feel in having to, you know, almost put on Jew face in order to make a position and make it very performative, which makes us cringe a little bit. At the moment, we have here a royal commission into anti-Semitism as a way of deflecting from the genocide that's happening in Gaza, and again, making it so much more important for us to take a position in any way we can. Now, I'd love to hear some of your comments here. Any questions from our audience in person? And also anyone who's joined us online, please feel free to add your questions in the chat. Yes.
Thanks for that. It was great. It was just, I just don't know enough about this, but I was wondering how non-Zionist Jewish nationalism would work. Specifically, would it be a nationalism that's still focused on Palestine, particularly? Because, you know, obviously when the Zionist project was being formulated in the late 19th century, there was an openness about it being, the state being in several different places. It just strikes me that maybe, you know, the history of the association, that maybe that's not such a good idea. I mean, that reason.
Ilan, could you hear that?
Not all of it. Could you kind of summarize it?
So I was just wondering if you could explain or say a bit more about what Jewish nationalism would be if it wasn't Zionism.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, I understand it. Yeah. Well, as I said, there are these attempts. I mentioned two scholastic works by Daniel Boyarin and by Sol Magid. I think these are written in a very kind of academic style, and I think we need more accessible writing and discussion on this. It cannot remain in the intellectual level. It has to be practical and so on. So I'll try and do my best here. I think that let's start with Palestine itself. As I said, the only group I know that offers Judaism as nationalism in the future are those groups of Jews and Palestinians who talk about the future as a binational state. I don't support it because I don't see how Jewish nationalism can be defined if it's not defined as Zionism. I can see how it can be defined as nationalism of a sort in outside of Palestine, but again, I'm not sure that nationalism is the right framework for this. What people are talking about, I see it as a cultural collective identity. We are all, I think, debating it because it's very clear that you can have a very strict Jewish religious life, and then you know what Judaism means, right? But what happens when it's not? And here also there is a spectrum. I mean, Reform Judaism and Conservative Judaism, and people are entitled to of course, to define their own what Judaism means for them individually and collectively, without anyone saying to them, you are or you're not Jewish because of that. So I think it's less, in a way, I think it's less problematic outside, and I think that's what the question meant, that the problem is inside rather than outside. And inside, I'm going back to the way Jews were defined themselves in a mosaic of the Levant or the Eastern Mediterranean, or what the Arab, what is called in Arabic the Mashriq, the Eastern Mediterranean, and there you had people who it was a group. If you want, it was identity politics, but not of the kind that is sometimes condemned out in the West. It was a local version of identity politics, which still exists today. You know, people can belong to a group that has a certain religious or ethnic or cultural identity because it's a convenient reference group. It's something that protects you. It's something that helps you through its solidarity and through your common share with their history and culture and tradition to feel at home, but at the same time be a citizen of a state, even if the state does not reflect that particular group, or moving more easily as they used to do in the late 19th century from one group to the other. It was much more easier to move in those days. So I don't think there's a formula for the collective identity of Jewish, I would call it, by the way, Jewish Hebrew. I think Hebrew is important here. The Jewish Hebrew identity of Jews, if there would be an insistence to have a collective identity, namely if the idea of one person, one vote, just a proper secular democratic state is not totally adaptable to the Middle East, which probably it is not adaptable, then I think that this would be based on more about an ethnic, cultural, and religious basis and not a national one. Unless people would call it nationalism. So I think we have to be worried not to confuse semantics with reality. You can call something a national identity, but you might as an outside observer, say actually what you mean is that you have an ethno-cultural identity. But it depends how much your self-acclaimed identity as a national identity contributes or doesn't contribute to coexistence, to stability, to building a new society. My guess is that it has to do a lot more with culture and ethnicity than with nationalism, if indeed we will witness the decolonization of Palestine. So, in my book, just to answer more with this, I stop here. Because this problem bothered me, in my last book, I tried to imagine Palestine in 2048 and Jewish life in Palestine in 2048. And if you look at the book, you can see that through this imagined future, I see Jewish life as centered around Hebrew, around the language, and around folklore and culture, and of course religion, but not on nationalism, and one that is accepted by the society around it. And in fact, I predicted not a lot, I don't put a number, but there will be Jews who are now citizens of Israel who will not want to stay in a non-apartheid Israel and would leave. Well, mostly, I think, European Jews who have dual nationalities and can ignite their jobs elsewhere. Yeah.
I think we're also already seeing some of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, you are.
By the way, Anti-Zionism Australia is not a Jewish organization. We're a non-denominational organization because we felt that there is a need for that more broad political activism that's not tied to one's unique identity. So any other questions here from the audience? Yes.
You said that we need to dissociate the Jewish communities worldwide with anti-Zionism. I mean, you said just a few minutes ago that in the future you imagine Israel the Jewish community to be full of law and stuff. What I want to ask is the verse that Netanyahu cited on October 28th, 2023, verse Samuel chapter 15, verse 3, about the Amalekites. I want to know how do we understand this verse? Surely I think it's going to be there.
So the question, I'm not sure if you could hear.
Thank you. No, I couldn't.
It was about the specific verse that Benjamin Netanyahu uses about the Amalekites and needing to annihilate the Amalekites. And how do you see that in terms of Jewish nationalism?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that Zionism today, although it has a lot of common features with the early Zionist movement or the Zionism that was led by the labor movement until the 1970s or until the last century, despite its common feature, it also has transformed into something new, which I call Messianic Judaism, and I claim that the State of Israel has become the State of Judea. And with it, what you can see is that forces who used to be marginal in the Zionist camp are becoming now dominant. The difference between the old State of Israel and the new State of Judea was that the old State of Israel, I think some of its ideologues and leaders, even genuinely, tried to reconcile, totally unsuccessfully, between building an ethnic racist state on the one hand and building a democracy on the other. Reality showed them that it was impossible. You could either have a democratic state or you could have a racist state. You can't have both. But they were, kind of playing with the hope that giving up some territory, giving some more rights to the Palestinians inside Israel, somehow would square the circle, and that failed. And I think part of that failure is the reason, because of that failure, the current ideological trend brand of Zionism rather took over. And that agreed, actually, in a way, agreed with people like me who said this is impossible to reconcile. But their conclusion was that because it's impossible to reconcile, there's no need to play the democratic game. So I think that's one feature of it, choosing an ethnic racist state because it's impossible to reconcile democracy and racism. But there's something else here, of course. This goes back to the very difficult relationship that Zionism had with Judaism from the very beginning. Judaism, until the rise of Zionism, was something that you can call rabbinical Judaism. There was a Judaism that, since the Roman times, was based on learning, on teaching, on perfecting the relationship between the faithful and themselves and the faithful and God. There was no conversation or interest in sovereignty, nationalism, political power, let alone military power, and so on. And that replaced a kind of Judaism that was there before the fall of the kingdom of Judea. You could call it Hebraic Judaism based around the temple, around sovereignty, around power, around statehood, and so on. In order to justify the colonization of Palestine, ironically, mostly secular Jews on the left reconnected with Hebraic Judaism. So they turned the Bible into an ideological book of nationalism, a proof that there is a moral and historical right for the Jews of Europe to colonize Palestine and turn it into a Jewish state. Yes, there were socialists, and then there were Democrats, and then there were liberals, and they were trying, as I said, to reconcile. But it failed. So now what we have is a new brand of Zionism that goes back to this Hebraic idea of Judaism, wants to reconstruct the kingdoms of David and Solomon, want to build a theocracy in Palestine because they believe there's a connection between the theocratic nature of the state and its success in policies. And therefore is devoid of all the inhibitions that the previous version of Zionism had. Now, the labor Zionists are the ones who committed the Nakba. They're the ones who ethnically cleansed half of Palestine. But they were not proud of it. They were not trying to, broadcast it. They were trying to hide it. I know it took us time to uncover it. And therefore, they were interested in having as much of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians as possible, but they still hoped that that could be done without losing the democratic nature of Israel, without taking it out of what they would call the community of civilized nations. This present ideological elite is not interested in international law, is not interested in international, in the world's view about it. It's motivated by messianic ideas and ideologies, and therefore it sees the elimination of the Palestinians in Palestine as a religious imperative, one that is justified by religion, not just by question of national existence. Now, Netanyahu fits into this more hardcore ideology for very opportunistic reasons. I don't think this is exactly his ideological view of the world. It's just he is very interested in power for the sake of power, and he aligned himself with what he thought was a coalition that would make sure that he and his family would be ruling Israel for as long as possible. And therefore, he was willing to align himself with these fascist and racist Israeli politicians who openly talk about decimating the Palestinian people, on genocide and so on, using, of course, the Bible. The Bible is very important for them in order to justify these actions, and building on something that the previous generation had already provided them, a very racist, indoctrinated educational system, media system that dehumanized the Palestinian from the very early encounters between the Zionist movement and the indigenous people of Palestine. Dehumanization is, as you know, in Australia, is a very important part of any settler colonial project. It just it's a different way of both talking about it, unfortunately, also of going about it in the field itself. So they escalated from ethnic cleansing to genocide. They expanded the areas which they think should be part of the future Jewish state. But this is also why they would fall, because this is going beyond something that I think the region or the world will, in the long term, tolerate.
Thank you. Any more questions from our audience? I have some questions received online, and for anyone in the chat, please write your questions for the host in the chat. Ruth would like to know, what do you think will happen in the next 1 to 2 years in Gaza and the West Bank?
Well, if we're talking about the next year or two, I'm afraid much of the same, probably worse in some aspects. Namely, I don't think there will be any significant change in the balance of power in Gaza. I think half of it will be controlled by Israel and it's totally depopulated. Half of it will be probably dominated still by the Hamas. And this would create a very uneasy relationship between the Israeli military and the Palestinian movement of the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. But I can't see any significant move towards reconstruction, rebuilding, or including the whole future of Palestine in a genuine conversation about the future. So I'm afraid that what really we are witnessing is the transformation from an overt genocidal policies that supposedly ended in October 2025 into an incremental one. Namely, the magnitude of killing and wounding and so on is not the same, but still constant, is still constant. And probably our role as activists is to disrupt this narrative that we are in the day after, we're in a peace process and so on, and just to make sure that a lot of what we did while we thought the genocide was going on needs still to be done. A very worrying scenario is for the West Bank, as you probably all know. Israel, both the army and the settlers, escalated their actions against the local Palestinians. 3 Palestinian refugee camps were totally ethnically cleansed. The harassment, pogroms, attacks on Palestinians are a daily matter now, always ending with killing and wounding. There were already last month few attempts to burn Palestinian families in their homes. The army is not doing anything against it. In fact, it's quite complicit in these actions. The world's attention is, if at all, is a bit on Gaza, but because of the Iran war, is not even on Gaza, and it's very important to alert people to what's going on in the West Bank. Palestinians inside Israel are exposed to a different kind of terror through criminal gangs that are allowed by the government to terrorize and intimidate the communities. That we call it the quiet transfer, because it puts pressure on people to leave. So I think a lot of I can give you a very dark kind of dismal scenario for the year or two, but I think much depends on the position of the Europeans. I don't know, maybe the fact that the EU and Britain were not willing to join Trump in the attack on Iran is a good indication. Maybe the clearer position of Ireland, Spain on the question is an indication that maybe some more assertive action will be taken by the Union against Israel. The position of the Arab countries is very important. So many of them normalized the relationship with Israel and therefore, in a way, normalized the colonization and ethnic cleansing. And I wonder what they have learned from the fact that allowing Israel to run havoc in the Middle East is affecting their oil fields, their energy fields, and so on. So it would be interesting to see if there's a change in the regional approach in the next year or two, because a change in the regional approach and international approach from above especially can save the lives of many Palestinians, even if it doesn't solve the problem. I'll give you an example. If the EU would have imposed on Israel half of the sanction it imposed on Russia as a result of its war on the Ukraine, the lives of thousands of Palestinians would have been saved. And of course, your own country is important in this respect, as other countries in the global north and global south. But Israel is still not deterred. And if it's not deterred, it means that there will be more Palestinian and Lebanese victims, and maybe even more. You know, if you think about it, today in the Middle East, you have 6 million people who are refugees because of Israel. 2 million in Gaza and the West Bank, 1 million in Lebanon, and 3 million in Tehran. So 6 million people in the Middle East are without their homes and are refugees because of Israeli policies, with the help of the Americans in the case of Iran. This will continue unless someone would say this is crazy, this is adventurism that violates international law, violates the international system as we know it, affects the energy market, stabilization in the world, and so on. Are we all worried enough about it? Because it's not just about Palestine or Syria or Lebanon. It's about the world. And it's not only focused on Palestine. I mean, what the United States did in Venezuela was the prelude for that. And what it wants to do in Cuba is the next chapter, probably. And that gives an indication to China and Russia that the international system doesn't exist anymore. God knows where this could lead to. So, yeah, I think it's important to make it an epicenter of problems which are regional and global, not just local.
Yes, thank you. Now I have another question here from Adnan Mansour, who is a Palestinian member of Free Palestine Melbourne and friend of many of us. He'd like to say that it is not a question as such, what he'd like to add, but that it's a plea that we need the support of anti-Zionist Jews to work with or without Palestinians, and the current Royal Commission puts that need in sharp focus. The Royal Commission into anti-Semitism. Another question here from Ruben. How do we navigate this hijacking of narrative on the ongoing genocide by sweeping that under the carpet and instead focusing on Jewish feelings and sensitivities around anti-Semitism?
Yeah, it's an important... First of all, of course, we need to make sure that the Palestinians, authentic Palestinian voices are at the front. They're the ones who should talk about the ambitions, aspiration, the future. And Jews, whether they are from inside or outside, should redefine for themselves what solidarity means, rather than seeing themselves as leading the way. I think that could help. That can really help. And then the Jewish issue doesn't become, first of all, the priority. And when it is discussed, I hope, in the context that I suggested it, that it's an important but not exclusive part of the question that have to be addressed in order to push forward the prospects of liberation and decolonization. And I think that's the best way of doing it. We had very interesting conversation in Vienna when, for example, Rada Karmi, whom I'm sure many of you know the name, who participated in the conference in Vienna, was a bit annoyed that the conference had a lot of Palestinian flags and all the insignia that goes along with the pro-Palestine action. And I think what she meant, she didn't object to it as such, but she meant if it is a Jewish conversation, let it be a Jewish conversation about Zionism, and not just part of the pro-Palestinian movement. But of course, we try to do both, and that's why it's a bit confusing. And we had Palestinian speakers in Vienna, and we're going to have Palestinian speakers in Dublin. It goes together, of course. It's a movement in the making, and I think it will find, after teasing problem, the best way of articulating its place in the overall effort, both in solidarity and both in building something different on the ground. There are inspirational models. Actually, we have in mind two models, and I think we cannot invent the wheel always, but always remember that the models from history might eventually not be exactly the models of the future. There will be maybe another one. You have the model of Algeria, where all these French settlers, who actually were in Algeria as long as the Jewish settlers have been in Palestine, all left. That was the idea. You decolonize Algeria by totally ending the project of settler colonialism in Algeria. But there were historical and geographical circumstances that made it a bit more possible. Not that the Algerians demanded it. There was the decision of the French settlers themselves. And then you have the model of South Africa, where the white group redefines itself within a new South Africa, in a rainbow South Africa. Becomes another tribe, if you want, another group within a multi-group society. It could be something in between. I do hope, as someone who wants to be there when it's happening, that we are rebuilding the pre-48 Palestine, where Muslims and Christians and Jews coexisted, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims all felt that they're part of Islamic civilization, that they are reconnected organically to the Arab world, that the nation state that the colonialist powers built after the First World War were not necessarily there forever, and there was a rethinking of what political structure would fit much better the realities on the ground. And I think that this is something that will continue to be deliberated, and we will see how best we can do it. But undoubtedly, when someone like Muhammad al-Kurd or others say, don't put me in a position that I should worry about what does it do to the Jews and so on. Absolutely right. I mean, it reminds me, in Jaffa we had there's a nice Arab Jewish theater in Jaffa, and one of the plays it showed was called The Confession, and that is a place that reconstructed the massacre in Tantura in 1948 and the debate after that between historians. Did it happen? Did it not happen? What is the implications of what happened? So on. And there was a discussion with the audience after the play. I should say the director, no, not the director, but all the actor and the actresses were Palestinians. And there was a liberal kind of Zionist there who said to one of the actresses, he said to her, I understand that you are talking in the play and yourself about the right of return of the Palestinian refugees, but I hope you also can contain our fear from such a right, or from the implementation of such a right? And she said, no, I can't. I don't have to contain your fear. It's your problem. I don't have to deal with your fear of what happens if my family would be reunited in Palestine after you expel them. No, it's you should deal with your fear. Right? It's not something that I should deal with. And I think that's part of the conversation to be had. And I think we are more and more moving towards it in a clearer and more effective way. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have a few more questions. One from Veronica.
Thank you. Curious if think that in Israel people are noticing the pro-Palestinian activism happening in Australia, because I know we're on the other side of the globe and there's a big distance, but do you think they are aware, like things like Sydney Harbour Bridge, for example?
You mean Israelis or Palestinians?
Israelis. No, I know Palestinians.
Israeli Jews. Well, it's important. Most Israeli Jews are being informed by 3 television channels, by newspapers. Very few of them, by the way, read the Haaretz, so don't look at the Haaretz as a newspaper that tells you what's going on in that respect. So I think most Israeli Jews are totally convinced by what the government says about such activities and marches, that it's a new kind of anti-Semitism, and that it's unjustified, and it equates anti-Semitism, denial of the Holocaust, support for terrorism, and so on. It's very unfortunate. I think that somewhere, maybe the deeper layer, because it's not only hearing about these activities. Israelis know exactly how they're being treated abroad when they go now. They're not the most welcome tourists and guests in many parts of the world. The first reaction is to accept what the government says. Well, that's because of new kind of anti-Semitism. Maybe for some, in a deeper kind of conversation, they would see the connection between what the state is doing and that kind of attitude. But so far, there's no indication that this is a widespread recognition, which shows you how indoctrinated the society is, despite the age of internet and so on. But if you look at the sources of information for the vast majority of Israeli Jews, you're not surprised that this is a result. That's why I do think that the message of the boycott is not enough at its present form, because it is sport, Eurovision, all these kinds of things that bring the message far more in a stronger way to them, that there is a price tag that could not easily be defined as anti-Semitic. But if they are reported, these actions, unfortunately still they are reported as manifestation of anti-Semitism, not as solidarity. Even Haaretz had quite a bizarre way of analyzing Jewish Voices for Peace and other organizations, and that's typical to liberal Zionists, as people who are misled, misguided, who support the Palestinians in such a way because they want to be on good terms with their friends on the left, totally disrespect for the possibility that young American Jews support the Palestinians for moral reasons. Unbelievable. But that's the conversation we even have among liberal Zionists, that they do not give the respect to people to say, maybe it's the genocide, maybe it's Zionism, maybe it's the ethnic cleansing that lead young Jews to question Israel. It's quite incredible, actually, that this kind of inability to see themselves and what they're doing, and understand that the world is watching, the world knows, and the world doesn't tolerate it. I mean, part of the world doesn't tolerate it. And for the liberal Zionists, the part of the world that doesn't tolerate it is an important part. I don't think it matters to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, but it does matter to those who might replace Netanyahu in the next elections. So we'll see how that plays in the future.
The so-called Zionist left.
Yeah.
Now, I have apparently there's some difficulty entering questions into the chat, so you have to send them directly to host, and we'll see if that works. I have a message here from Jackie who says, Ilan, thank you for being with us tonight. If what we see now is as horrific as it is, and we are told as regimes fall, the horrors get worse, in this case for Palestinians, what do you see happening as and when Netanyahu no longer leads Israel, and Israel is led by any other of the most toxic right-wing ministers? Or do you see Netanyahu staying on? This is not uplifting.
Yeah. Well, it's a matter of distinguishing between small improvements and fundamental changes in the big picture. If the next government would not have people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in them, it would be a relief. Especially for Palestinian citizens of Israel, for instance. I don't think it will change very much the policy towards the people in Gaza, the West Bank, South Lebanon, or Israel's conduct in the region. So definitely looking at it from a macro perspective, and that's why we're talking about Zionism and not Israel only. These are not revolutions in the regime. This is the same regime with a different kind of leadership. Maybe, if at all, Netanyahu would lose the elections. So basically, the threat to Palestinians would remain. The threat to people in South Lebanon would remain. The threat to the region would remain. And the need to change the regime would remain. So I don't see this as a development that fundamentally changes the reality. It might ease few aspects of it if Netanyahu is out of the. It's not even Netanyahu. I don't think Netanyahu is that important. It's the fact that he, in order to survive, he allied himself with this particular messianic and racist and fascist Jews. I don't anticipate any fundamental changes in the policies. There are no dynamics of change from within the Israeli Jewish society, which of course strategically means a very important decision has to be taken by how do you increase and escalate the pressure from the outside, because these dynamics do not exist from the inside. But looking at all the potential candidates to replace Netanyahu, even in different kinds of coalitions, one cannot see any hope for a different kind of reality unfolding on the ground. Yeah.
Sadly. Now I have another question of a similar ilk about what do you foresee of Trump's plan for Gaza and this coalition for peace? How do you think that will play out?
Well, I don't think it's a peace plan. I don't think it was meant to be a peace plan. It's one of these towers in the air that Trump is building whimsically, not out of thinking or strategizing. I don't think anything would come out of it. I do hope that more reasonable forces involved, because he does have a coalition for that plan, which include Turkey, some countries in Southeast Asia, Europeans, and so on. At least that they would realize that if you want to reconstruct Gaza, it has to be done by the Gazans themselves. and not by real estate developers coming from the United States, so let alone those who would come from Israel and would reshape the biggest prison on earth and make it a modern version of it, or cutting edge technology using in order to make it more modern and effective. So I'm afraid that until the international community, especially Europe, but not only, Australia as well, would realize that their role is not to help mediate between Israelis and Palestinians, but that their role is to defend the Palestinians. Until that realization is not internalized, the policies from above by the most actors on the international scene are not going to contribute to a change in the reality or tame Israel or limit its destructive policies and actions.
Thank you very much, Ilan. We have 10 more minutes left, and we still have a few more hands up here and another few questions on the chat. Rehat?
It's obvious that Zionism has been a disaster to the people of the Middle East, to Jewish people, to Muslims, to Christians worldwide. And I'm just wondering, from what you've just pointed out about, unless change is not going to come from within, Israel is a nuclear superpower and a militaristic racist state. So we can't hope for things to change from within. If the democratic world leaders are not prepared to stand up to Israel, given the genocide we've seen in Gaza, what is it that we can do to bring over a change or to tip the balance in favor of the Palestinians when places like Germany are instrumental to what's happening in the Middle East and in terms of the European Union? What can we do?
Yeah, well, I think we all have to find a way of narrowing the gap between what so many millions of people feel in their own societies about Palestine and the policies of their governments. I mean, there's still a disconnect, either in democratic states or in non-democratic states, between the popular feeling of not only of the need to face Israel and to challenge it, but of the realization of the connection between injustices in one's own societies and the injustice in Palestine. I mean, this is something that I think is far more important feature of the recent years compared to other chapters in the solidarity with the Palestinians. It's this realization that there's a connection between ecological injustice, poverty, questions of immigration, and the future of Palestine. This is encouraging because it's a good basis for creating an international coalition. But the gap is there between the other coalition made of the political elites who still regard cynically or genuinely Israel as an asset that has to be protected. Now, how do we make the will of the people inform the policies of the governments is a big question. I think each one in our localities will know better how to answer this question, how to do it best. What are we missing? What we are not doing? And I think cling on to the beginning of changes that we see, for example, in the Democratic Party in the United States, in some governments and so on. But we understand that this is not enough, and we have to find a way. I said it before, how do we move from the B and D in the BDS, the boycott and divestment, to the S, to the sanctions, which is the most effective thing that we can do. Well, we can't do it. Governments can do it. We cannot do it. I think it's going in the right direction, but the problem is that this pace is slower than the pace of destruction on the ground. Look at the election, the local elections in Britain. A very important party in the elections for Birmingham, which is the second largest city in the UK, is called the Coalition for Gaza, for local elections. So people are aware of the need to connect the issues together. What we can do, we can only think how to make it more, how to escalate it so that it works. We're dealing with a very difficult type of politicians in our world today. They're self-centered. They are interested in politics as an occupation, not as a vocation. It's difficult. It's difficult. So I don't think moral persuasion is what is needed. Is somehow to make it politically worth their while to support Palestine, because I don't think it will all work on the level of saying, "Don't you care what's happening there?" No, they don't. But they do care about their political careers. So we have to find a way and dirty our hands. You cannot take a purist approach to this. And that means creating alliances sometimes with people you're not particularly happy about. But that's the only way of doing it. I don't know any other way in history that this was done without these effective, large coalitions.
Okay. That is so helpful and so inspiring. Thank you so much, Ilan, for speaking with us today and giving us so much of your time and doing all that you do. Thank you so much. Before everybody leaves, we do have two more people who want to give a brief message. Firstly, David Glantz is going to speak about our next seminar, which is in 2 weeks' time. You want to come and say a few words about it? And we also want to give you a quick reminder to participate in the Royal Commission. That's after David. So hang around with us for a few moments. But first, let's all give a big thank you to Ilan.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
David, come and stand here so people in the Zoom can also see you.
Okay, I will be very quick because we've had an amazing 1.5 hours. Just the immediate answer in Melbourne to the question, what do we do, is be at the State Library on Sunday next weekend, 12 o'clock. It's Nakba Day, and there will be a Nakba Day rally. And I think being on the streets and being seen on the streets won't solve all our problems, but if we're not on the streets, then the issue of Palestine will disappear. So there's a much bigger question to be discussed. I'm not going to do that, but just to say 12 o'clock next Sunday at the State Library. In 2 weeks' time, we will be back, I think, in the library again. Date and time and place to be confirmed. And I'll be giving a talk which won't be on Zoom. You'll have to be here in person or watch it later on YouTube, which answers the point that comes from Zionists, which is Zionism has always been the viewpoint of Jews. Zionism has always been popular and the majority view. And I will look at that historically. From the inception of political Zionism in the late 19th century, really through to the Holocaust. And I'll be arguing that in reality, the bulk of Jews, particularly in Europe and in North America, did not look to Zionism, were hostile to Zionism, looked instead to various versions of left-wing ideas, primarily the Bund, firstly in the Russian Empire and then later in Poland, or communism. And so I will be sort of knocking down that Zionist argument that the Zionists have always spoken for us, have always been popular, have always been the voice of the Jewish community, and we'll do that historically and then maybe draw out some conclusions for the world today. So that will be in a fortnight.
And I am here to gently nudge you. If you haven't already done a submission to the Royal Commission, please do. It's really important that we all make our voices known. I know it's clumsy. I know it's awkward. I know most of us want to pretend it's not happening, but we do actually have an important role to play in this. And it's not just Jewish people. As an ally, you can write in. I know a lot of people don't know what to write. I'm just encouraging you guys, keep it simple, keep it personal. If you're Jewish, it is worthwhile mentioning, if you have Holocaust ancestors, or if you have, if you're Israeli, all that kind of stuff. It's so uncomfortable to kind of use it, but it is important. It's the sort of stuff they're paying attention to. And ideally before June 1st, and just do it.
Thank you. And I'm sorry we didn't have time for all of the questions, but thank you so much for everyone who came here, to Kathleen Syme, and thank you to everyone who's online. We hope to see you again. So, we're done.